So there's been a lot of entitled reaction to the release of Operation Harsh Doorstop by Drakeling Labs, Blue Drake 42, and I'd like to put that in a proper historical context and help some of these people that are trying out this free game for the first time see things in a more educated perspective if I can. The tactical shooter genre, as far as I can figure out, was born this way. I'll explain the order of events that led to its at least intellectual creation. As far as I know, I don't know any alternative histories to this. So, one of the first, I guess, shooters, if you can call it that, that I ever experienced or saw on a personal computer was Castle Wolfenstein um, on the Apple II that was owned by a friend. I think he actually owned an Apple II Plus, whatever that means. But we used to, visit his place and play games on his computer. And frankly, I was a poor kid. I had some gaming consoles like the Atari 2600, and my dad handed me down a TI-99 4A computer that I could use to program some games on. But yeah, most of the games I played were on gaming consoles, but mostly the Atari 2600. There was the ColecoVision, I think, and was it Intellivision? Were those the same thing? I forget, but there were some others, but the Atari 2600 was the most common. So to see computer games was out of the ordinary, and at least in my neighborhood. And so seeing something like Castle Wolfenstein was extraordinary. And one of the things that impressed me, even though I had played Berserk, and I should have a screenshot of Berserk here, which I played that on the Atari. I'm not sure who published that in its arcade game form, but in Berserk, the laser blasts or whatever traveled across the screen fairly slowly. In Castle Wolfenstein, your avatar, I guess if you would call it that, your sprite, whatever, it would hold up a gun, and then the muzzle would just flash, and then if the target was lined up on your gun, then they would get hit. So you didn't even see a projectile move across the screen. So it was like more realistic than Berserk, and I was really impressed by that when I saw it, although I didn't actually play the game because I think it would have been too difficult for me, not having much time to practice it since it was on my friend's computer. But I did play another game which I can't find any historical evidence for on the internet, which they say that anything that's ever been on the internet never dies, and that's just not true. There are Rainbow Six mods I'm trying to find that I can't find anywhere on the internet. They're just not there anymore. So yes, something that is uploaded to the internet can die. So I played another arcade game called Pistol Master, and the arcade rack or box or rig or whatever you would call it, cabinet, I guess, It had a mock-up of a Beretta 93R machine pistol on it. And in that game you would shoot like a whole scene of bad guys, and then near the end of the level the boss would jump out and he would say, "Get 'em, boys," and all of the bad guys would pop up and start shooting at you. And you could spend your time shooting all of them, but they would chop you down and kill you. You had to learn that you had to just unload on the boss in order to finish the level. And anyway, so that was a fun game. I enjoyed it. Then that was in the mid 80s. Then I went into the Army in 1986 at the ripe old age of 17. And when I got to my permanent duty station in Alaska, I eventually, a friend of mine who was a cavalry scout, we were in an air cavalry squadron, but we lived in the barracks. So he had bought himself a Commodore 64 128 at the post exchange, and when he saw he had one, I had plenty of money to burn, so I bought one for myself, also from the PX. And they had games there at the PX that you could buy. And one of them, evidently the name, I thought it was F-19 Stealth Fighter, but evidently the name was Project Stealth Fighter. Well, the F-19 Stealth Fighter was, I think, a disinformation campaign, to hide, I guess, the true stealth technology of the F-117 fighter bomber. Excuse me, getting old. And the Microprose made some excellent games for the Commodore 64, and Project Stealth Fighter was one of them. I also played its game F-15 Strike Eagle, and I'm not sure, I think they had some other flight sim games that I don't think I had. Oh, how could I forget? Gunship by Microprose, where you flew an Apache helicopter. Excellent. We had so much fun playing that game. I had friends come over, and who were also in the squadron, and we're all like huddled up around my television, which was my display for my Commodore 64, if I remember correctly. And I mean, there might have been a separate display I had to buy for it, but I don't think so. I think I used a television. And I had like a couple of friends. They were crew chiefs in the air cav, and like one of them, he even brought his helmet and his Nomex flight gloves to fly plane gunship, and they just had a blast. Like once the guy was really high up in the sky, and he got taken out by enemy AA, and the engine was shot out, so the Apache's like falling out of the sky, dropping like a rock. Meanwhile, they're able to punch off 2 Hellfires and kill 2 enemy vehicles while it's falling to its death. And I don't think auto rotation was possible in that situation, because the engine was taken out. Well, no, I guess auto rotation would have been possible. Maybe the rotor was shot off. Or maybe we just hadn't learned how to auto rotate yet. Anyway, doesn't matter. So we're playing these games that are like 2 frames per second, or at least it seemed like it, and we're having fun. There's no multiplayer. There's no setting up your own dedicated server. If there were any cheats, I certainly didn't have them. Maybe I found out cheat codes from a bulletin board system from my friend, if I did. But if you cheated back then, you were just cheating against yourself, which is essentially what you're doing when you cheat nowadays anyway. You're just cheating against yourself. You're not improving your own skills. Maybe you're improving your own skills at cheating, but unless you can find a line of work where you get paid to cheat, maybe with the FBI or the CIA, then then maybe there's a payout for practicing your cheating skills. But for most of us, there's no payout for cheating. So, so I played Project F-19 stealth fighter, and I played Gunship and F-15 Strike Eagle, and I also played another Microprose title. Really, Microprose dominated the Commodore 64 for excellent games, and this title was called Airborne Ranger. Well, it had like a map of the mission area, which was kind of reminiscent of, was it called Commando? I think it was called Commando in the arcade. And anyway, apparently it was a V-22 Osprey, which I think they were just a concept at the time. I mean, that was a long time ago. It would drop you somewhere on the field, and I think you could drop in a supply drop of weapons and ammo somewhere on the field before you dropped in. And then you had to fight your way across the map, but it wasn't like a bird's eye view necessarily. It was kind of an oblique view, kind of like Zaxxon, I guess. And here's some screenshots of it here. And you had trenches you could sneak through. You could actually sneak through a trench, and then an enemy soldier would walk up to the edge of this trench, and you could pop up and stab him with a knife. And if you fired, you could actually fire and kill things off screen, which is one of the things I have always found maddening about overhead view shooters, is the ridiculously short range on the weapons in those games. I just can't take them seriously. There's nothing realistic about it. And that was some of my dissatisfaction. Although Airborne Ranger was a great game, lots of fun, I was dissatisfied by how unrealistic the simulation was. So I came up with an idea for an infantry simulator, right? You had Microprose's Airborne Ranger, and then you had its Project Stealth Fighter. Why not just have the camera in the infantry soldier in a 3D environment? So I drew up some screen concept art, which looked very similar to, I don't know if that's vector-based graphics, but it's like shapes made up of lines and angles, and it's not as pretty as sprites, but truly 3D, I guess. So you're moving in a 3D environment that I don't know if it could be infinite, but the play area was much larger than the little map in Airborne Ranger. So I wrote out what I wanted in a game and my idea for it, and I thought that it would be better if the soldier in the game was Special Forces, because then you would get to use a wider variety of weapons than a regular infantryman. So I sent that idea to Microprose in 1988, and they sent me back a letter saying that they forwarded that idea to their research and development department. And in my letter, I had said, look, I waive any rights to this idea. I just want to play the game because it's much like my position right now with Operation Harsh Doorstop. I've got some ideas for Operation Harsh Doorstop, but I don't have the modding skills in the Unreal Engine. And when I tried to install the SDK on my older computer, it just seemed to grind it to a halt almost. It was my system seemed like it was so bogged down that I just had to uninstall the SDK in order to get my computer back. So it didn't look like I was going to be able to, you know, even learn how to use the SDK on my computer. It's just too old. So, so I sent that idea, waiving any rights, saying I just wanted to play the game. Well, I finished my term of service in the Army and went on to do something else where I was detached from society pretty much for about 2 years. And then, and it wasn't prison. And so when I came back, uh, I went into either a bookstore or something like a GameStop or something, and I saw uh, Electronic Arts title SEAL Team, and I could see uh, from, I think there was a screenshot on the back of the box, maybe not, but it it sounded like the game I wanted to play. And when I loaded it on my computer, which I'm not even sure it would work, I don't think it would work on my PC at the time because my father had handed down this old PC to me, and I could play like, I think it had Windows 3.1 on it or something. And anyway, so my dad showed me what it looked like on his computer, and then he decided he needed a new computer anyway, so then I think he handed down to me the computer that it was able to work on. And when I got in it, it looked just like the concept that I sent to Microprose, and it was awesome. EA's SEAL Team was a great game. One of my main complaints about it, though, was that the satchel charge was like in your revolving list of items, and if you were revolving through your list of items and you hit the fire button on the satchel charge, you would plant and set the timer on a satchel charge right underneath you. And you could do this while you were pinned down by enemy machine gun fire forcibly. The game would force you to remain pinned while you were pinned down by enemy suppressive fire. So you could plant a you could plant a charge underneath yourself while you were pinned down and unable to run away, and do it by accident, and that kind of drove me nuts. So, but otherwise, great game. The only thing different from today's, well, one of the main things, I guess, different from today's first-person shooters is that you wouldn't actually use your mouse to aim at the target. You would kind of face your soldier in the direction of the target, and then you would like tab lock onto the enemy target, and then you would, I think, press the left mouse button to fire, or maybe the joystick fire button to fire, but then the game would calculate whether you hit or not, and you would expend like so many rounds trying to hit the enemy in that game, and they would fire back at you like so many rounds, and that was an attempt to simulate the reality of firefights in Vietnam, because the game, while it had vegetation, it didn't have the sort of thick vegetation that, for example, you might see in Operation Harsh Doorstop. So Um, so there was kind of like a disconnect as to why am I not hitting the target? I can see him, he's right there. When in reality, maybe the reason, or in Vietnam, the reason that they weren't hitting a target right there might have been because of all of the concealment or the vegetation blocking rounds and causing them to deflect or whatever. Anyway, so um, and then there was kind of a silence. Oh, and by the way, SEAL Team like had a lot of the things that you would see like in Squad or Arma these days. It was a pretty much a full spectrum warfare game. You could call in airstrikes with air support, and then I think I'm not sure if it was a Cobra would come in and do an airstrike for you. I think fighter jets might have come in and do airstrikes for you too. I could be wrong on that. But you could extract by helicopter or insert by helicopter. You could also insert or extract by maritime vessel, like a plastic patrol boat. And also those PBRs could fire from, the river at targets on land if you directed them to. So it was a pretty amazing game. There was one mission that I couldn't for the life of me seem to do very well on, and so then I wound up just giving every single one of the SEALs in the four-man team an M79 grenade launcher, and we just approached the village and just naded the whole thing, and that's how I beat the mission. So some problems require unorthodox solutions. So great game, but oh, you know what? And I left out another game that is part of this evolution, and I'll have to put that in here too. But so you had other games coming out. You had the new version of Wolfenstein, Wolfenstein 3D, I think. I don't remember whether Wolfenstein 3D had multiplayer or not. But here you had, a 3D environment where you actually lined up your weapon with the enemy and fired. And then, of course, you had Doom, where you did the same thing. There was no vertical aiming in Doom. The game handled that automatically. Then you had Quake, which I think in Quake you had vertical aiming, right? But Doom had multiplayer. My dad and I used to play Doom multiplayer against each other and had a hell of a lot of fun at it. But like my first multiplayer game in a first-person shooter against anonymous players was in Quake. And that blew my mind, man. That was an adrenaline rush. So, but none of these titles, I don't think they could be considered tactical shooters. Maybe Wolfenstein 3D could be. I don't know. So then eventually Rainbow Six 1 on the PC came out, and I looked at the box, had to have it, and I had just come back from another one of those situations where I was disconnected from society for a while, and I came back, and I think my father must have handed down another PC to me. That was one thing about my father, was he seemed to be pretty empathic when it came to understanding that his son needed a PC. And it also gave him a reason to buy a new one, I guess, which he had a good job. He could afford it, I guess. So so I got this PC, and then I was putting installing Rainbow Six One on it, but my graphics card couldn't handle it, and it wasn't drawing like the aiming reticles correctly. The sprites on the aiming reticles were just like a box or a square. So then my friend from the army, still friends with him to this day, he the one who had the Commodore 64, he told me that he asked me what kind of graphics card I had. I told him it was a Voodoo card, and he said, "Oh, well, you can get another Voodoo card, and you can join them up with a cable in tandem, and that will give you twice the graphical processing power." And he said, "And I just happen to have an old Voodoo card I'm not using, so I'll just send it to you." And so I installed that, and then I was able to play Rainbow Six One on the PC. And this was the first true tactical shooter, by our concept of what a tactical shooter requires, which is aiming with the mouse. Although Rainbow Six One did have an auto aim feature in it. So that's how we got to the tactical first person shooter. Rainbow Six One did have multiplayer. I don't know if it had cheats, people cheating in it or not. I don't think you had like multiplayer server browsers happening in Rainbow Six One. There may have been like a website you could use or an app, but I kind of doubt it. That was more a thing in the sequel Rogue Spear. Now, in these games, like in Rainbow Six One, I could download the NATO mod for Rainbow Six One by ARM, ARMM, I think it was called. I forgot what that stood for. And then NATO made a mod for the sequel to Rainbow Six One, Rogue Spear. NATO... Anyway, the final one that I know of is NATO 3.5. And then in Rogue Spear, there were a lot more mods for Rogue Spear, because then they added some proper mod support in Rogue Spear Urban Operations, the expansion. Anyway, so while my modding ability in Unreal Engine doesn't exist yet, I learned how to mod Rogue Spear, and recently through the Black Ops version 2.0 mod at ModDB, I'm now able to play all of the Rainbow Six One content. That includes the Eagle Watch expansion. Able to play Rogue Spear, all of its expansions. That's Urban Operations, Covert Ops, Blackthorn, and also the standalone Korean version of Rogue Spear called Takedown. But you know what? There are still things I want in that game. So, for one, the default weapon sound effects really get on my nerves because they sound so freaking cartoony. So, I had worked on mods for Rogue Spear before back in the day, and now that I was playing the game after more than a decade, there were things I was dissatisfied with this new Rogue Spear experience, which Black Ops version 2.0 runs on a modified Blackthorn engine, by the way. So what did I do? I set about modding the game, and that's what I'm doing in the Black Bag mod, also at ModDB. Not only have I been creating this weapons mod with realistic gun sound effects, but as I was thinking about the configuration of the weapon files, I also thought up new capabilities for the AI. I thought I might have to get into the somehow edit the executable for the game, which was going to be out of my reach and abilities. But no, I didn't even have to do that. All I had to do was a workaround with some of the weapon files, and I created the ability for the tangos to throw frags and flashbangs, something that's never been in this game. And I also created the ability for them to suicide bomb, something that's never been in this game. So with a little bit of mental work, and it wasn't even like conscious mental work, it was more my brain had background processes going on, and it thought up these solutions, while I was busy doing other things. And then all I had to do was go home and implement the idea, and now it's a reality. So my perspective on Operation Harsh Doorstop, which is a what do you call it? A something bed, like a seed bed. Would that be the proper term? It's a seed bed for whatever you want your gaming experience to be, because there's an open SDK for this game, and you don't have to worry about getting sued if you mod the game. My answer is, if you're missing something in Operation Harsh Doorstop, do what Blue Drake 42 says and mod it yourself. Make it what you want, because you're standing on the shoulders of games that didn't have the capabilities that Operation Harsh Doorstop does, and I had to pay for all these titles that came before. You're getting OHD for free. So put in the sweat equity and make the game what you want. There are some legitimate criticisms, I guess, sure, for the base game, but you're still getting a free game. Anything you see that's deficient in the game, you can fix yourself, just like I've modded Rogue Spear recently with this black bag mod. It's, make your own reality. Put in the time, put in the work, build up a team of talent, make it what you want, stop complaining. That's my perspective.